talking a little bit about some work that we've been doing, and again, this is some work that has been evolving and presented in various areas. We spend a lot of time looking at herd fertility from the female side. Okay? We sometimes forget that there's a boar involved, and we often assume that the boar is kind of a neutral aspect. And I guess something that we've been doing is looking at boar fertility, seeing how it can be managed. Okay? Is there an impact? And we think there is, and we're seeing that there is. And there's ways that we can improve on the use of boars, and in doing so, improve on herd fertility. Okay? So we know that not all boars are created equal. Okay? We inherently know that. We evaluate them. We evaluate them before they go into the studs. We look at their semen, and we are suspicious of that. And again, remember that single sperm equals is half of a piglet. Okay? And keep in mind that during fertilization, you've only got about 1,000 sperm. They're actually reaching the point of fertilization, where the eggs are, where the oocytes are, and producing that litter. Okay? But what we're finding is that there's certain boars that are actually seem to be better at getting those sperm there and actually doing that job. So, as I said, we do assess fertility. We tend to rely a great deal on semen characteristics to evaluate semen or evaluate fertility, and there is a strong correlation. Okay? If semen is below certain standards, we'll see reduced fertility. But what we're finding is even in boars that have been their semen's been evaluated and they have what's considered normal or standard semen characteristics, so better than 70% fertility or even greater than 80% and less than 20 or 30 abnormal sperm, we're still seeing differences in fertility. Okay? They're fertile, but some are more fertile than others. And there's a number of studies that have been done to actually demonstrate have been published. This is data I like to show because it's data that came to us unsolicited. Okay, this is data from a nucleus in Canada. Okay, land-raised nucleus where they data from 31 boars, and they sent it to us because they were looking at it and looking at the total born numbers coming out of the boars. Okay, so you can see the average out of these 31 boars, and these represent at least 50 matings per boar. The average was about 12 total born. Okay. And you've got some variation here. You've got a cluster around the average. You've got a couple that are quite high. But what we're interested in is these bottom third here. Okay, so you've got bottom third well below the average, and what we looked at is if you actually were able to eliminate those from that breeding group, you could actually increase total born by piglet litter. Now we do a whole lot of figuring, planning, and development of protocols to increase with sows and gilts to try and get that piglet litter. In this case, it looks like we can help do that by selecting the appropriate boars. So let's bring this all up. So right now we do evaluate our boars, but what's keeping us from actually using our best boars? Okay, well, one of them is an inability, or the inability comes not because we don't want to, but just the way we manage our boars. We don't actually evaluate fertility very well. And we don't evaluate fertility, the ability of the boars to be fertile when we take their doses down, say below 3 billion to 2 billion or 1 billion, that sort of thing. As well, we tend to pool semen. Okay, so we assume that once they're put in a pool, that they're fertile, that they're contributing to that pool. We have no evidence of that. Okay, unless we do paternity testing, we don't know which boar in a pool is actually contributing. Okay, actually producing that litter. Okay, could be if there's 4 boars in there. Could be 2 boars are producing almost all the piglets. And as well, something that we haven't been doing a lot of, and there's been some interest in this, but there's been varying degrees of application, has been the use of advanced ARTs. When I say advanced ARTs, are things like post-cervical insemination, also referred to as IUI or inter-uterine insemination, and things like fixed-time AI. Okay? So these are some things that we've been looking at. As well, I guess the one consideration is that we know that there are certain boars that as soon as you take them below, say, 2 billion, they're not very fertile. So as soon as you put them in a pool, they're automatically below 2 billion. Okay? And so you're diluting those sperm out. Again, because they're pooled, you don't know if they're contributing or not. And as well, by pooling, we're actually breaking the genetic connection. We don't know if we've got a high index boar, Ideally, we want that animal to be producing offspring, but we don't know if they are. And if you've got only a portion of your boars actually contributing to the offspring that you're producing, how do you track the genetic potential? How do you track if you're actually making genetic gain? Because again, the whole idea behind artificial insemination is to reduce the number of boars that we actually need, use the best ones. Okay, so we have been doing that to some degree, but we really think we can improve on that. And in doing so, we can have long-term gains and actually have better boars applied more efficiently, so we can produce better offspring, and produce more effectively. So again, I just went through that fairly quickly because that's something that we've kind of harped on for a few years now. What we've been doing is applying some protocols in various systems and trying to see how we're actually impacting these types of things. So if we use better boars, we should be producing a better product. And what is the implication of that? Well, obviously you've got better feed conversion, fewer days to market, decreased mortality. Okay, you've probably got better carcass quality as well. Okay? And the whole idea is that we're increasing the value of the product being produced and probably producing it more effectively. So what do we see as the steps to improved AI programs? One is that we need to be actually identifying the fertility or defining the fertility of the boars going into the studies. Not just assuming that because they have appropriate semen characteristics that they're going to be fertile, that they're going to all contribute in the same manner. That's not the case. And in order to do that, we can't be pooling them right off the bat. We need to be doing single sire matings. As well, we need to be challenging these animals because research that we've done, and as I demonstrated before, indicates that there's a population of boars out there that don't perform very well when you get below 3 billion. But they're not the majority. They're actually the minority. From research that we've done and the data I'm going to show you, it looks like it's only about 10 or 15% of the boars actually need to be at 3 billion. When you drop below 3 billion down to 2 billion, it's only a minority that actually have an effect on fertility. So we're actually compensating for a very small portion of the boars by inseminating 3 billion. So if we test them at 2 billion, we can get rid of them and use all the other ones more effectively. As well, talking about ARTs, once we have boars that are well characterized, we know that they're more effective at, say, a lower dose, those are probably the best candidates to do things like post-cervical AI. Okay. I know there's been some various responses and various degrees of success with things like post-cervical AI, and that may be because the boars that they were using in that environment aren't the best ones and most appropriate for that technology. And again, the whole idea behind this is to retain and use the highest EBV boars to produce our commercial project. So, as I said, we've initiated a number of trials, both in Canada and the US. The one that we've actually got the most data on is with Holden Farms, just south of here. Okay? And again, it's a collaborative trial, and what we were trying to do is decrease the semen concentration of the AI doses in this system and use their superior boars. Okay? So this is about a 40,000 sow system. They have 2 internal studs. Okay? And so it was a good system to work with because we could manage things quite well. So in this trial, we started out, all boars coming into the studs were evaluated the way we would normally. They have to have the appropriate semen characteristics. But then we did single sire matings with them at 2 billion sperm per dose. And again, it was standard AI, multiple doses. And what we've been able to do is move their entire system to 2 billion sperm per dose. Having done that, we're now moving the system to, actually it should be we wanted to move to 1.1 billion viable sperm per dose with post-cervical AI. They've gone to 1.5, so they're still making progress. Okay? But the whole idea here is to move them to a more effective application of boars. So I'll just walk you through what we're doing. Okay, so boars are coming in, so the same number of boars are being recruited into the stud as if they we're still inseminating at 3 billion. So they actually have a third more boars than they actually need. But they're screening these so they can find the best ones. Okay? So they're coming to the stud. Again, we're doing single sire inseminations, and we do at least 50 matings. Again, 50 matings isn't a lot. Okay? It's not going to show us the difference between two relatively high fertility boars, but it does allow us to identify these lower end boars, the ones that really don't perform that well. And those are the ones we want to get rid of. And initially, these are the characteristics we were looking at. Fairly simple. All we were looking at is pregnancy rate at day 30, as well as farrowing rate, and then once the farrow, looking at litter size, both total and alive. And this is the initial data that we were looking at. Okay, looking at day 30 pregnancy farrowing rate. You can see that there's quite a range here. Okay, and you can see that, so pregnancy rate at day 30, if there's a difference between pregnancy and farrowing rate, it's represented by this bar. And generally, pregnancy rate at day 30 was relatively good indication of farrowing rate. You can see there's a huge variation over, there's actually 66 boars here. And so we've got this guy here whose farrowing rate and, or pregnancy rate and farrowing rate were almost done. We're essentially 100% on those 50 matings. And as you go down this way, you can see that we're getting below 95, 90, and then you've got this group down here, and you've got a couple of really bad guys that had other issues going on as well. But because we'd reduced the actual dose, we only needed a third. We could eliminate a third of these. Okay, so this bottom third were easy to eliminate. Okay, and because pregnancy rate was strong at day 30 was strongly correlated to farrowing rate. Okay, you can see the correlation here. We could actually, once we had the day 30 data, okay, so we could collect that data fairly quickly, we could actually cull some of these boars fairly early in their production. So that was the first aspect. We started looking at fertility, just seeing which boars. And we're seeing that, again, there was about 10 to 15% that really weren't performing fertility-wise as soon as we got down to 2 billion. Okay? So we start with this group, but we could reduce by a third, okay? But only 10 to 15% had fertility issues. So the other consideration is how do we make up this other, I guess, 15 to 20%, okay? And then if we go to the next step, and we've got these boars that work well at 2 billion, and we want to move to 1.5 or 1 billion, then we can reduce it even more. So how do we make this decision? We've already got boars that we're pretty sure are fertile. What's the next step? What's the criteria? So we started looking at the various aspects. So we're already looking at farrowing rate, looking at litter size. So the next step, primary thing, is EBV. What is the value of the piglets coming out of these boars? As well, we all started looking at things like what is their role in non-productive days. Okay, so if you've got a boar that's not that has a slightly lower produce slightly lower pregnancy rate, how does that affect non-productive days? And there's other things. One of the things we looked at is how many semen doses is that individual producing. Okay? So if you've got one that actually has a more concentrated ejaculate, then you have to process fewer boars to get the same number of doses. But I think initially we concentrated on these aspects. Okay? And what we came up with was a contribution index. Okay? So this was based on breeding, the concept that with the data that we had, if we bred these boars to 100 sows, what was the value of the pigs that those breedings would produce? And that's the farrowing rate multiplied by born alive. Okay, so that would give the actual number of pigs that would be produced, multiplied by the index, and we gave the each index point based on recommendations from PIC a value of 7 cents per index. You can see these are still ordered in what we saw as far as farrowing rate and pregnancy rate, but there's a lot of variation now in the actual value based on these other parameters. So if we ordered them based on contribution index, you can see a nice slope here. There's a huge amount of variation. So again, if we only we want to eliminate the bottom third, they seem fairly obvious. Okay? If we want to go further, we've got nice delineations here to be able to do that. And it's not just based on the performance, it's based on the value of what they're producing. So, having looked at the data, and so this is again about 60, we've got probably about 200, 250 boars that have gone through this process. This is the first 66 or 67. So some boars were eliminated for non-trial based reasons. None of the fertility we're looking at. So we had, these guys here had other health issues. We had one up here that had a really high value that had behavioral issues. We had some that had substandard semen quality. So as they were collected, they had issues. Now these guys make sense, but look, we've got some very high value animals, which probably meant that they were still producing fairly good litters, but their semen was poor quality, so that made them questionable at that level. As well, throughout, we've got some that had some structure. So they're eliminated based on those considerations. So we started looking at the other factors as well. Okay, so if you look at the relative pregnancy rate that these boars produced and the resulting non-productive days, okay, Francisco this morning outlined the cost of these non-productive days, so if the boar is contributing to that, we should probably consider that. So as we go here, we've got increasing value. You can see that there's a continual drop in the non-productive days produced by, that can be attributed to the boar. As well, that affects the number of pigs weaned per year. Okay. Again, pregnancy rates going up, your non-productive days going down. You can see an increase, gradual, in the actual number of pigs being produced based on the boars that are actually. So based on this data, we've got animals that were eliminated for various reasons throughout this population, but in addition to that, we were able to eliminate these other boars for fertility reasons. These ones are based on the trial data that we had. One thing that PIC was concerned about was, is there a relationship between index and fertility? And as you can see, there doesn't seem to be. Okay? It doesn't mean that the ones with the higher index tend to have lower fertility. It seems to span throughout. Okay? So that wasn't an issue. We've got relatively high index boars with poor fertility and vice versa. So it works fairly well. So based on this population, okay, this one group, we started with 66, their average index was 121, contribution index was about 1,300. 8 of them were eliminated for structure, okay, and this is the value of those animals. Substandard semen, okay, they were eliminated, 7 of those were eliminated, and that's their value. You can see these guys had tended to have a lower contribution index. And then looking at overall fertility, so these would have been animals that had acceptable semen, but had lower fertility, so lower bearing rate, pregnancy rate, and extremely low. So there's 8 of those, and their contribution was much lower. So of the 43 boars remaining, index hasn't increased dramatically, a little bit, but you can see by increasing things like bearing rate, litter size, you've got a fairly big increase in contribution index. Conceptually, if you reduce this 66 down to half and only use the higher index animals within that, you could increase the index from 121 to 125 and increase the index by over 100, the contribution index by over 100 points. So it's quite substantial. As well, Amanda Williams, now Amanda Minton, from PIC, did some economic calculations based on the Holden system, the 40,000 cell system. So using these parameters, going from standard AI with 3 billion to 2 billion, and then moving from standard AI, she used 1 billion. Again, the Holden system's actually gone to 1.5. But you can see that there's certain parameters that don't change. So the number of inseminations stays the same per animal. The number of boars needed obviously drops dramatically. You can also increase the index because you can select the higher value boars. Number of animals bred doesn't change. Okay. In this case, she was actually fairly conservative. She assumed that the number of pigs per roost per sow per year would stay the same. Okay, that's probably not the case. We're seeing that should increase, but even in this case, she was conservative and didn't include that in the formula. And with a wean to farrow loss of 7%, number of pigs produced stays the same. Okay, and the value of increased index up here is 7 cents. So here, this going from 3 to 2 billion, and using higher index boars, you've got almost a $200,000 increase in opportunities. Then, if we calculate this based on moving all the sows to PCAI, so post-cervical AI, not doing it in gilts, so you're actually decreasing the number of boars again, increasing index, same number of animals bred, same number of pigs produced, but the actual increased opportunity theoretically is about $500,000. So we can see the potential for increased productivity and increased value by selecting the boars. As I said, she didn't include the number of pigs produced by those boars, the influence of the boars on that. Just looking at this, if we look at the lower value boars, mid value boars, and high value boars, if you get back to the point we're using 1 billion sperm with post-cervical AI, you could increase the actual number of pigs produced by pig. So there's added value there as well. So it's key message here. What we can see is that we can reduce semen concentrations by selecting the boars, reducing the number of boars needed, increasing index, and from the calculation that done through with PI to C, you're actually increasing the value of pigs by from 80 cents to almost $1.30. As well, just something to keep in mind, we're doing other research on this. Okay? We've got a population of boars that with defined fertility. We collected blood samples from them and we started doing SNP analysis, so doing the genotyping to see if we can find genetic markers or genetic indicators that relate to boar fertility, so we can screen them as they go into the studs. As well, we're collecting seminal plasma, so seminal fluid, and we're going to start, we've done some pilot work to look at the proteins in those to see if there's any relationship to fertility there, and maybe we can find a relationship between the genotypes and the proteins as well. So ideally, we'll have markers that, again, we can use before they actually go into stud and see if there's boars that are questionable at that point, or the ones that maybe have markers that mean they're potentially better chance of being fertile.